The party elders, assisted by George Clooney in his op-ed in the New York Times, decided in a back room somewhere that Joe had to go.
She is a professor emeritus of psychology at Cal State University.
Longtime political figure, politician, and activist.
The author of the book, Just Not That Likable.
Gloria Romero.
The power, the grip of people under the dome in Sacramento, it's very real. It's very profound. It's very much an elite club to which, only 40 people belong to the California State Senate out of some 30 million people in California. That's a pretty powerful club.
We're spending $120 billion with a B. We have 75% of our kids who lack basic proficiency, math and reading. 43% of our third graders can read at level, and that portends really poorly for their futures. What's gone wrong, Senator?
I call our education system in California, it's really not an education system, it's a public works system.
Senator Gloria Romero, welcome to State of Gold.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
It's an honor to have you. I have so many things I want to talk to you about. You have such a rich and interesting background. And of course, you were the first woman to be Senate Majority Leader in California, which is a huge deal. And of course, you shocked and awed the state and the party last fall when you switched from Democrat to Republican before the election. You came out for Trump. I guess the elephant in the room question is, what was the moment, if there was one, when you had the awakening, I've got to switch parties?
Well, to some extent, the elephant in the room was my recognition that it was a dead donkey that I had been riding for far too long, and it was really time to go. I don't know that if there was one particular, moment. It really was sort of living this dystopian reality of what the Democratic Party had become. And like so many others, Bobby Kennedy or Leo Terrell or Tulsi Gabbard, like them, I didn't recognize this party any longer. And it had been a while that I didn't recognize it. But I suppose if there was really a final moment, it really, I think, was when 14 million votes, in the Democratic primary were just thrown out. When the party elders, assisted by George Clooney in his op-ed in the New York Times, decided in a back room somewhere that Joe had to go. And, I have participated in delegations, in Latin America, Mexico. We oftentimes talk about the dedazo, the finger, or basically, the party elites in a Latin American country, a banana republic, maybe might say, this person's out and this is our candidate. And that's essentially what happened in America. There was a dedazo that was pointed, and people, not elected by anybody, in a back room, Nancy Pelosi as well, Chuck Schumer, decided that 14 million votes were going to be tossed out. And remember, at this time, there was this whole discussion about the party of democracy and blah, blah, blah. And yet 14 million votes were just obliterated. And I'm going to be the first to say that Joe Biden was a horrible candidate. I mean, the platform was horrible. But the point was that primary had already been rigged from the beginning. I mean, like Bobby hadn't even had a chance to really play by rules. They were perverted and distorted and manipulated so that he, or I think it was Dean Phillips and others, just couldn't even participate. And then the rest were sidelined. And having been, in some of the upper echelons, dare I say, of the Democratic Party in California, I know what that feels like when you basically get the political body slam. If you don't do this, basically, then, fill in the blank. And so I just said, I can't support this. But really, at the very, very end, when I picked up the phone and I just said, I'm leaving, packing my bags, it was when I saw Bobby Kennedy saying, I'm out of here. And I mean, that's a Kennedy. That's somebody I had a great deal of respect for. And I thought, he's leaving. It's time. I need to pack up my bags and go too. And that's when I called, some dear friends, and I just said, I'm out of here. I'm going to announce. And that's what I did.
Who did you talk to first when you decided to notify people or the party or friends? I'm just curious.
I mean, I talked to family. I talked to, my daughter. She had long been trying to encourage me to leave as well. But just some close, just allies and friends. I mean, there weren't elected officials per se, but people that I've worked with. I had been part of the group, Golden Together, where basically, Steve Hilton was the head of that. I've served on the advisory board. I spoke with him as well. I talked to a number of people and just said, and I wasn't consulting. I just said, it's time.
Yep.
I'm leaving. I'm out of here. Will you stand by me?
What was the blowback like?
Actually, I don't think I got the full force of the blowback. Uh, I think a lot of people, they know me. And they know that even when I was, I've been out of the legislature since 2010. So it's a long time. But even back then, and ironically, I was considered, and I called myself progressive. I was left of center. I was a true blue Democrat. But I was a Democrat that worked across the aisle, and people knew that. And I think people saw that I was willing to take on very powerful political interests, like the teachers union in California, over my fight for reform for schools. And over the years then and subsequent to that, I continue to point out that the biggest block on educational success in California has been the clout of the California Teachers Association and its conglomerate of interests in Sacramento that continues to operate and maintain education failure in California. So I think people knew that. I did see some stuff on social media, blah, blah, blah. You know what? As I've said in politics, you have to have a thick skin. I don't pay attention to it. I actually got a few phone calls that said, "Good for you. I'd kinda like to go too, but I can't quite." So, there wasn't anything that was really horrific. Nobody sent, the head of a horse to me or anything like that. There was some quibbling, but overall, I don't think people were too surprised because they had
Mhm.
begun to see and listen to what I had been saying over the years, so I don't think it really came as a shock.
Yeah. Yeah. So no horses in the bed. That's good. No Godfather treatment. But I wonder, you alluded to this. If you had to project into the minds, you are a PhD in psychology, project into the minds of other legislators right now in California, Democrats, senators, and assembly members who are thinking of switching. How many do you think there are, and what prevents them?
I think fear prevents them. This is what I discovered. Let me just go back to this. This is what I discovered in Sacramento. And it's not exactly positive, but you almost have to choose which side are you on. And you can choose to say, I'm going to stay on the side of vested interests and power, and I will have a political career in front of me, or I will take on the system. I will throw that proverbial monkey wrench into the wheel and just basically stop the machine from going forward, and your political career is over. I mean, there's not a lot of room in between. So you get spinelessness versus it basically being stopped in a political track.
Martyrdom?
Yeah, yeah, to some extent. And for me, it was always, I didn't need to be an elected official. I thought I was very good in the work that I did, but at the end of the day, I just thought I don't need this. There's ways to do education and political reform in California and be able to look at myself in the mirror at the end of the day with a clear conscience. And I'm not saying that people are morally bankrupt. But what I am saying is that the power, the grip of people under the dome in Sacramento, it's very real. It's very profound. It's very much an elite club to which, you know, only what, 40 people belong to the California State Senate out of some 30 million people in California. That's a pretty powerful club. And so you have to go through that, and that's California. I can imagine Washington, D.C., it's even worse, because the power is that much more intense. So I think there's a lot of desire for change, but the rules are such that it makes it very difficult to break through. We've seen recently in Sacramento of some key pieces of legislation, some common sense stuff where you would think that members in the legislature would say, I'm going to vote for this reform. And they get stifled because the voices of the party, which really is the power of the purse that's funneled through by some key Democratic allies in Sacramento that feed the beast, basically have just said, no, you can't do that. So we find Democrats across the country defending, MS-13 or defending, Maryland fathers or defending things like, basically 16 and 17-year-old kids. It's okay to basically allow them to be solicited for selling for sex when ordinarily out on the street, probably somebody would say, what the hell are you thinking about? That's
Yeah.
like, no, you don't do that.
That
But
one's
it's the power.
particularly that one's particularly crazy and shameful. But I wanna ask you, given your depth of advocacy and passion around education reform, let's talk about this for a minute, and the dynamics in Sacramento. We're spending 120 billion with a B. For those out there watching and listening who don't know what the state budget looks like, $120 billion dollars on K through 12. We're worse off than we were a generation ago. We have 75% of our kids who lack basic proficiency, math and reading. And I believe the stat that's particularly shameful from EdSource is only 43% of our third graders can read at level, and that portends really poorly for their futures. What's gone wrong, Senator, and where do you place the blame?
Well, I'm the first one to say that I believe in public education. Education, it is, Dr. Martin Luther King spoke about this. It's the promissory note to basically access the American dream. It's what makes us equal. It's what gives you a chance in life. My mother, I always point out my own background. My mother had a sixth grade level of education, but she wanted all of her kids, and there were six of us, to be able to graduate from high school. That was her hope. And all of us did. And I went on to college and I got a PhD, and I one day was elected to the legislature and I chaired the education committee. And I enacted and struggled to get legislation to give parents rights and to fight for education reform and to show what was happening in the system under this $120 billion. It was a little bit less when I was still there, but still, it was almost half the entire California state budget, and it wasn't working. And you can't blame COVID. You can't blame a pandemic. This has been generational. It has been going on over and over. And so what happens, I think, overall, when we look at it is again to is how the rules are written. It's the power of the system. I call our education system in California, it's really not an education system, it's a public works system. And the system is designed to work for the adults in the system.
To
And
employ
the
them?
Right, and the adults are not only the teachers in the classroom, but also as well to the administrators, it's the service workers, it's basically this conglomerate, and because the teachers' unions are the most powerful, forget oil and the pharmaceutical industry and, tobacco and all of that, the most powerful political entity in California is really, the teachers' union, headed by the California Teachers Association. And then all of labor basically joins forces so that you have, the brotherhood, the sisterhood. You all come together. An injury to one is an injury to all. And so it basically pushes forth. And that's what the Democrats and Republicans come up across when they are looking to vote in Sacramento. And again, and I don't, I want to see the adults in the system, I mean, treated well, treated
Mhm.
decently, but not to the point when you know that it is blocking, forevermore the opportunities for kids, especially poor kids, children of color in California, all kids really. Um, but what happens is that the money gets diverted, and the rather than looking at basically, addressing the most critical needs and how to teach. the most vulnerable children. Basically, the contracts get set up, so essentially, they provide for perks and privileges to basically oftentimes provide this cycle whereby the least trained teachers end up in some of the neediest neighborhoods. And so, therefore, you just find this cycle where learning does not occur.
Yep.
There's been in California not long ago a whole debate over what we call the science of reading. And a lot of, a lot of data in terms of how do we teach reading. It's not that hard, in all honesty, but it's been turned into something very convoluted and to a large extent, barely now in California are some of the folks now looking to say, okay, well, maybe we go ahead and we try something like phonics, which across the country we see it
It
works.
works.
It
It
can
works.
be done. Like,
Proven.
hello.
It's proven. Well, let me ask you about this because obviously there's a system that you've identified of interests that are aligned to keep the system the way it is, the structure the way it is, the rules the way it is around tenure and who can get fired and who can't. Really, no one gets fired, as we know. But why does the teachers union, when there's proven data from around the country and even trials in California, why do they resist rolling out something like phonics?
I think you get into all kinds of arguments. There are some, the California Association of Bilingual Educators, who argue that it goes against the interests of especially non English speaking children. I don't agree with that at all. I don't know where that comes from. But you get all these niche groups that have a vested interest on how to teach. And you know what? We can go ahead and we can make arguments about how to teach. But when you see over and over, year after year, decade after decade, generation after generation, crappy scores. I mean, come on, that's the definition of insanity. The same thing keeps being done, and the outcomes aren't improving. They're getting even worse overall. I think also, too, you find a non attention to the classroom. I think the other thing, and probably the most important, because you can look at it at the micro level, like the curriculum, the teaching, phonics, etc., but also in terms of how schools are run, how budgets are allocated in a classroom. You mentioned again to tenure and basically the inability to fire anybody. There's no Doge in California, despite the governor claiming recently that, golly gee, he started Doge before Elon Musk ever did.
What a joke.
Yeah, and if he did, it hasn't been successful. So
Uh-huh.
so it's time to Doge him for his failure. But I think what's happened is really the what we have in California, and California is not alone because many of these issues are across the country. It's a nation that is at risk in terms of educational failure. We have an education system that is determined by zip code. That's really all that it is. When you go in to a district, all that's asked is basically your address. And depending where you live, you are assigned to a school and you must go there. Cannot pass go, cannot collect your money. You have to go to this school. And that would be fine if the school was academically performing, producing results. Kids were closing academic gaps and growth was accelerating. But we see from the data itself that the state of California collects that we have what we can call you know, underperforming, I call them just failing schools that are producing failed outcomes. Where, you take a look at the statistics in California and you can find, especially for minority kids in California, that we're not learning to read. There's one statistic, let me tell you this one. This is in California, fourth graders, only 8%, that's single digit, 8% of Black, 23% of Latino fourth graders in California are proficient in reading. Think about that.
Shocking.
Oh, and again, too, so what are we
Shocking.
seeing? If only 8 are there, are people saying it's genetic? Is there a DNA thing? Is there a race thing? No. But then you look at that number and you think, then the system, there's something wrong with this system. But when you go back to the way that we allocate bodies to a district, how revenue is routed to districts, it's all about the money, where that money goes, 120 billion, how it gets allocated. And if there is choice where a parent could say, I'm out of here. I'm taking my kid. I'm going to take them to another option, like a charter school or a private school or homeschooling. What happens then is that the money goes with the kid out of the district because it's not being collected. And so therefore that district no longer has the money for its little perks and programs and exorbitant salaries for district superintendents when they themselves are not leading and producing the
What
results.
Senator, what are the district leaders earning a year, out of curiosity?
Well, I think, for example, in Los Angeles, it's something about 400,000. And LA Unified yeah, it's declined in its enrollment. The
Yes.
scores are horrendous. I had printed out a chart just a moment ago. LA Unified, if we take a look at the most recent testing scores in California, LA Unified, only 43% are at proficiency levels in English language arts, and that's across the board. 43%, that's a very, very low number. If we take a look at math standards, it's only 33%. I mean, how do you ever become a doctor or an astronaut? Not the Katy Perry type, but a real astronaut that would go into space and land on Mars one day. You can't become an
It's
astronaut
so
with
shameful. It's
percent.
so shameful, and I appreciate your bringing some of those statistics that show the contrast between the averages and then certain minority and ethnic communities, because it's supposedly the Democrats historically who have been the advocates for the disadvantaged and the working poor and minority groups and people of color. But what we see is, in fact, they've been the biggest blockers to advancement by promoting the system that you've called out. And I think it's so shocking and so shameful. You know, you're known for the parent trigger law, which, for those who don't, that legislation, it enables parents with kids in underperforming schools to petition for alternative options for their kids. What's the state of play, Senator, with that law and the actual ability of parents with kids in underperforming schools to get something better for them?
I'm glad you asked that. And this again, too, tells the story of what happens to a law that challenges the system. If you look, the law's on the books. The problem is nobody can use it. And
Why
the
not?
reason being is basically that the metric that was utilized to say this is how you calculate who gets on the list of basically how, whether or not a school is underperforming, it basically was wiped out because the testing that was used to measure that has been eliminated. So it's basically a technical default. And it's really, really sad to take a look at, in the 14 years since I've been gone from Sacramento, that's what happened. But I think the spirit of the parent trigger law still exists. I would challenge the California legislature to come on, put something there that exists. We have data, we have numbers, but I think that tells you why so many of the insiders in Sacramento, led by the teachers union, just say basically they don't want testing because we have then a metric that we can use. And I'm the first one to say, look, it's not just one number, but it is an important number. You think about it. When you go to the doctor's office, you walk in, you step on the scale, or you get, your heartbeat, blood pressure, blood sugar levels. You have a metric that gives you a warning as to, hey, you know what? You got to really work on this issue or that issue. It's the beginning to give you a health check. Same thing too with these scores. It becomes a very important metric by which we can assess. And then when you take it each year, that's when you can take a look at, am I closing the gaps? Am I accelerating the growth? And these numbers, when I give you 8% of Black children in California, fourth graders not being able to read, this hasn't changed dramatically year after year. So
Shame,
that's
shame, shame.
there's been stagnation
Yeah,
there. And that's what these special interests don't want to do because it then means we got to think about how they're trained, the contracts, the assignment, and the possibility of choice. Because we know kids can learn. We see it. We see changes
of
overall,
course.
but they're not learning in those environments that are not bringing forth the strongest and best and most dedicated ways to change children and really impact their lives forever.
Yeah, that's so well said. And it's such a shame. There's a saying, expect what you inspect. And if you don't inspect things and understand the numbers, expect the same result. It is the definition of insanity. I want to take a quick time out and encourage our viewers and listeners to subscribe to the show and to follow us so you don't miss an upcoming fantastic interview like this one with Senator Romero. I want to switch to hope and solutions because this is what we collectively need to be about, right? Fixing our state education system is just a huge priority. It's the hope of the future of our children. And I know at the Romero Institute, you're thinking about and promoting education reform. Let's say you were given broad powers to shape the state education system. What's the number one thing you would do to get help to our kids to change the game in education?
Well, I think the number one issue across a number of measures. Let's start with governance in California. How does California govern education? It is this convoluted system that nobody understands. You have a governor, you have a superintendent of public instruction, you have a secretary of education, you have the big school board in the sky, the state board of education that's appointed by the governor, and they become political allies. Then you've got 1,000 school districts in California, each with their own school boards. And then at the federal level, you've got the Department of Education as well. What would I do at the beginning is I would start with governance and really rework that. Virtually every task force that has looked at governance in education in California has said, you got to change the way in which we allegedly govern California. I would say you eliminate the superintendent of public instruction. All that is, quite frankly, that is the spokesperson for the California Teachers Association, paid for by the taxpayers of the state of California. And they allegedly run the Department of Education, which is more woke than anything and will fight anything that actually educates kids. So I would really put it more within the realm of the governor's office with an empowered secretary of education. The governor runs every other division, department. I mean, we don't elect the head warden for the Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. Why do we then separate it out and elect the head superintendent? That's because that's the CTA that has that spot, and they will fight you for that. But I think you got to start with governance overall and to begin having questions about the ability for the state to not necessarily control. There's a lot of, again, to religion on local control. But like we've seen in Sacramento recently, when we know that some curriculum works across the country and many districts will not use it, there has to be a discussion about, do we have at least the opportunity and do we provide oversight of those districts to show that districts maybe that are using a more phonics-based approach, that is willing to do merit pay, that is willing to do bonuses, that is willing to redo the contract so you don't just have the more senior experienced teachers being able to bypass those areas of California that actually need talented teachers when you can actually fire personnel because they have molested kids rather than running rubber rooms, as we call them, and just parking them until they retire. So there's a lot that is there, but it begins, I think, really with good governance, I think, overall. So I think that's where I would start with. And then again, to really providing for parental school choice. I believe in charter schools, but I will tell you, I am not solely about charter schools. There are many charter schools that I believe should be shut down. They are performing worse than their area counterpart. And so I think there has to be oversight and vigilance. I would bring back the parent trigger law. I would encourage, because I also wrote the Romero Open Enrollment Act, and that basically allows parents to enroll their children, not necessarily in a charter school, but in any district school in California. They have to have room, of course. You don't want to stuff them in like little sardines in a can. But there's a lot of vacancies in California schools, as we know, and to be able to shop around for the school of your choice and to go there. And so you begin to put in some healthy competition And once you start seeing that and some movement and the ability of parents to move where they can, you are going to begin to find that these school districts, as a way of holding on to their students, they're going to have to offer a better product because I
Yep.
now have a choice. So I think there's a lot of these issues. Homeschooling, I think, is very important. And really having parents see and understand the power of curriculum. Parents, I think, got a really good glimpse of that during COVID, and suddenly many parents were just saying, I don't want my kids being subjected to that. And I think finally, one thing that I think is very important is that school systems cannot become the parent of the child. They cannot take away your kid. They cannot say that we're going to keep a secret from your parent. And if a parent, quote unquote, misgenders somebody, that now you can lose custody. That is complete.
Insanity.
Right.
Insanity. Yeah, I agree. That was such a cogent summary. I mean, at a high level, what I heard, and I completely agree, reorganize the way the system is managed. Because right now there's multiple points of accountability, therefore no accountability. Change the way that we encourage and compensate and select and promote teachers. I mean, great teachers should get paid way more. The bad ones should be gone, see ya, like any healthy organization. And then I think the final thing is competition that you mentioned. And I think you're right. Fundamentally, the vast majority of kids are going to go to public schools. So they need to be great, but we've got to have competition, right? So there should be choice. And after we make all of these overhauls, if there are still underperforming districts and schools, those parents should have the right to take the money and go and shop to a better alternative for the sake of their child. God bless them for that right. Let's shift, Senator, to a couple other topics. 2026 is coming fast. By my count right now, there's only one statewide elected Republican on the Board of Equalization. The other 11 are Democrats, right? And by the way, for those who don't know, the Board of Equalization oversees property and other tax policy. Let's look ahead to November of 2026. What do you predict with all of those constitutional officer elections in the state of California?
Well, I think it's still too soon to tell. I think that 26 often considered to be an off-year election. There's no presidential race. There is a very strong. It's a Democratic machine. There's no doubt about it, and it is very strong. So I think it depends upon who are the candidates. How many Republican candidates are there in each slot? We have the jungle primary, these races, so that it depends upon. You're basically doing math. You have to go through and calculate if I've got one Republican in a race, I've got a better shot at it than I've got 3 or 4 or 5, and they're splitting the vote. Same thing on the Democratic side as well. So I don't know, what will happen. I'm encouraged by what occurred in the November election and the willingness of California voters to more so swing, more conservative, and that was largely led by working class, and I'm very proud to say within the Latino community that overall rejected, as I did, saying, I don't get this Democratic Party anymore. What is it? What is it doing? I don't relate to that anymore and began to change overall. So I think we will, continue to see what may be occurring overall on this, but I think it's still a little bit too early to tell. Yes, 2026 is rapidly approaching, but give me a little bit more time and bring me back. I'm
Yeah,
not
we'll do that.
apostle in the sense, but I feel encouraged by building on this and so many disasters under Gavin Newsom, whether it be the homelessness that's just spiraled out of control, the fires here in Los Angeles that are partly the complete incompetence of the mayor of LA and the city council and her fire chief as well, along with the governor and his policies that have let these fires burn out of control, the misuse of money, missing money overall. There's a lot to be seen here, but I feel encouraged. I feel optimistic, and I think more and more people are waking up. Democrats, just like you or I or others, there, and just saying it's time for a change. Because if we don't take action in 2026, we're just losing more of our future, and more Californians are fleeing the state rather than, as we want to do, believe California matters. It is a golden state. We are worth investing in, but only if we fight for it to make it become the state that it should be.
Absolutely. That's why we named the show State of Gold. We once were and we can be again, 100%. Last couple topics, Senator. I'm curious what advice you would give to regular citizens who are frustrated and concerned in terms of taking action to make the state better.
Well, I guess I would go back to say, well, what will happen if you don't? You can't just sit in your house, close the shades, and lock the door and turn on the television set to legacy media that just spews a bunch of lies about what's happening in the real world. Life is taking a chance. Life is saying, let me pick myself up. I think, if anything, it's also looking out for the future. I go back to my mother, sixth grade level of education, but she thought about her children. She thought about the next generation. And you know what? It benefited. I would not be here had it not been for her. I would not be here if it not been for her. I remember her going to schools, going to some of these parent teacher conferences. She didn't really understand what was going on, but she knew it was important. She made room for me at the kitchen table. We didn't have desks or offices or private rooms, but she would make room for me to do homework and would make sure that she didn't know what I was doing, but she knew it was something that I had to do. And to give me an example by she would read. And so I emulated that as well. And so I think we have to think about, how do we make room for the next generation? What we see now, I'm fearful now, but what about the next? How fearful will I be when I am now 20, 30, 40 years later and there's no new generation that's going to be there to produce an economic base, an economy, a safety net that will take care of us in the future as as we go gray in the golden state. So I think it's something where I think if you believe in something, you invest in it. You take care of it. California has become somewhat of a diamond in the rough, but there's a diamond there, and we've got to take it and make it shiny again. And that's up
Um,
to us, because if we don't do it, nobody else is.
that's
And I
right.
think if we start, other people will join.
It's so well said. That's why I'm starting this podcast, starting to take action myself. We can all find a way. I want to finish with this, Senator. I ask everyone who comes on the show to answer 5 questions, kind of rapid fire. This is just from your gut, either a word or a quick phrase. You ready? You're a dictator for a day. What's the single thing you do to make California better for everyone?
Ah, dictator for a day. Okay, I'm gonna abolish the superintendent of public instruction office and take it under the governors.
Boom. Okay. Which California leader, past or present, do you respect most?
This is sad. That's a hard one. It really is. You know what? I was at the cathedral in downtown LA just not too long ago. So I'm going to put out Richard Riordan. He was a
Okay.
Republican. He was a businessman. He was savvy, great sense of humor. He worked across the aisle, and I remembered him because he's buried there.
Okay. That's a good one. What do outsiders get wrong about California?
That as California goes, so goes the nation. 49 other states don't need to succumb to the tyranny and the craziness of the far, far woke left.
What gives you hope that we can still fix the state?
That we're talking about it. People like you, that there is an interest in turning around California.
Excellent. And finally, finish this sentence. California is
It's golden now and forevermore.
beautiful, beautiful. Senator, this has been a great conversation. And love, your story, your political journey. Thank you so much for your voice, what you did when you were actually serving, what you're doing now. Great conversation. I hope to continue it.
Well, thank you, and I look forward to listening to your other guests on the show, and congratulations. This is a great opportunity, and thank you for launching.
Thank you. And we'll keep talking. We'll have you back. Thank you so much.